welcome to the Rock Your Best Life podcast. Today, my guest is Brett Lloyd. He is a MeatRx coach, down 116 pounds on a low-carb, high-fat carnivore diet. He has been battling depression, anxiety, and mental health illness for over a decade. But thanks to almost 3 years on a strict carnivore diet, he has decreased all of these. He has reversed all of these, actually. And he is rocking his best life yet. And he is using what he's learned to help others reverse their physical and mental health conditions through a keto and carnivore diet with his coaching over on MeatRx. Brett, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Rosa. I appreciate your invitation, and I look forward to us putting some good out into the world tonight.
Yes. So if you wouldn't mind, would you mind just starting, from the beginning, like, what's your story, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I was born 60 years ago in Huntington, West Virginia. There was 4 of us, and it was, your basic 4-member home. Mom, dad, and my little baby 6-foot-tall sister and I. And Mom and Dad had a huge vegetable garden. We had fresh vegetables year-round. Now, we also had plenty of meat. And it was our house. We were following the standard American diet to the letter. And out of the 4 of us, my little baby sister suffers from ulcerative colitis. My dad passed away last year after 20 years with type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. My mom's had a lot of minor autoimmune. There is such a thing as a minor autoimmune. It's nothing life-threatening, just aggravating autoimmune type stuff. And I suffered from chronic, severe depression, anxiety, and insomnia for over 40 years.
Wow. Of
my life. I was an angry, depressed kid growing up. Looking back now over my shoulder with clear, healthy eyes, I can tell that I, say for certainty, I started experiencing symptoms when I was around 15. It's when the sleep disruptions and the significant mood drops outside of puberty started happening. And I was functionally ill through my 20s, but I was also very self-destructive. And my behavior was terrible, but in my mind, this was normal. Which just goes to show what a big liar depression can be. For me, depression was, let me explain what depression is like for me. I mean, I was an angry, depressed person. I had an extreme dissatisfaction with everything, every aspect of my life. Nothing was ever good enough. I was never good enough. And, I had a few delusions along the way too, because Rosa, if I just had this coffee cup, all my life, all the problems of my life would just go away, and everything would be okay. I would whine and moan if I just had this cup, and my wife would go through all these ridiculous hoops and spend amounts of money that should never have been spent, just so I could get this coffee cup. And 10 minutes after I have it in my hands, I found 50 things wrong with it, and 20 other reasons why this is crap. I did that over and over and over again for years. I describe being depressed as, imagine if you had a 50-pound anvil on your head. It was there when you woke up in the morning. And it was there all day long, grinding on you, weighing you down, making everything you do so much harder. Everything you tried to say, any physical activity, you didn't have the energy for, because there's this weight on your head. And you went to bed that night knowing it was going to be there in the morning waiting. I became unable to accurately perceive my environment. my wife would say, "Oh, it's going to be a beautiful day, Rosa. Oh my gosh, it's going to be such a nice day." But my illness would twist that and change it into something completely different, never in my favor, to where what I honestly heard with my ears was, "Yeah, it's going to be another beautiful day." Right, sure.
Kind of like a
And,
Eeyore.
and you know, I love my wife. I adore her. And I would hear that. And my first, you know, natural inclination is, "What's wrong? Why did you say that way?" And of course, she would look at me like I was crazy. Of course I was. And it became very difficult to communicate because I couldn't understand what people were telling me, except in bits and pieces. And you can imagine how hard it was for my wife to have to, you know, here she was trying to deal with me as a sane person, as if I were sane and I was anything but. And it was just a horrible nightmare type kind of experience. I was first diagnosed formally in 1990, River Park Hospital in Huntington, West Virginia. I was originally first diagnosed with major depression, and my life had become unmanageable. I had to check myself into a psych hospital for 16 days. And then they put me on Prozac, but at that time it was insanely expensive and I just couldn't afford it. So I didn't take it for very long initially. But later in the early 90s, I started having really horrible panic attacks. One time I actually called the ER because I was convinced I was having a heart attack. I got to do the ride, the nitro under the tongue and all that kind of stuff, and get to the hospital and they did an EEG or whatever it is, you know, they hook you up to all this stuff. And my heart was fine, which was great. That's beautiful. But something else was definitely not right. A few months after that, I had a physician tell me that if you don't start taking medications right now, your life's going to become very uncomfortable. And so I had to eat the expense, and I started taking Prozac in 1995. And I took that medication as prescribed for 23 years.
Wow.
In the beginning, it was somewhat helpful, but after a couple of years, then my mood would just out of nowhere crash for no apparent reason. There wouldn't be any death in the family, sudden loss, you know, loss of job. There was nothing like that precipitating these mood crashes. They were just inexplicable. And I started gaining weight because my diet was garbage. I was standard American diet. And then when I was in my 20s, it was the standard beer and fast food diet.
Mm-hmm.
On into my early 30s. Then I married and divorced once because of illness and the dissatisfaction of life and the nightmare that was my existence at that time. But then I met my present and God willing final wife ever then. We've been together for over 20 years. But three years into that marriage, you know, the mood crashes started getting worse. And fast forward to 2006, 2007, around in that time frame, I had a textbook nervous breakdown. I didn't sleep for 6 to 8 weeks, more than an hour or two a night. And when you don't sleep enough at that rate, very bad things start to happen. I started hearing kids playing in the yard when I was the only one home.
Oh, wow.
That's not good.
No.
And so my diagnosis got changed to major depression with psychotic features, which I feel like out of all the diagnoses I was given, that was probably the most accurate one. Wow. They put me on a medication called Remeron, which bears note because I slept like a baby for 2 whole weeks.
Wow.
And I'm probably gained 20 to 25 pounds in that 2 weeks time because that medication is a notorious weight gaining med.
Yeah.
And then after the 2 weeks of sleep, I went on another 6-week tear of only sleeping an hour or two a night.
Oh
And
gosh.
things were starting to get really ugly. And they finally put me on this drug called Symbyax, which is Prozac with an antipsychotic medication whose name I can never remember because I can never pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And that stopped the free fall. But I was sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night, and I would have to have 1 or 2 2-hour naps during the day.
Oh wow.
And I was basically just a medicated lung.
Mm-hmm.
But that stopped the free fall. And I lived that way till around the latter part of December of 2008. And I was like, this sucks. This is horrible. I've got to talk myself out of this. I've got to get my head right somehow, because this is no good. And so I convinced myself that I was going to get better. I was going to start thinking more positively. I was going to start doing some things that I believed in my head were going to be helpful. And for a time, I did get a little better.
Mm-hmm.
So much so to the point when evening I was complaining about how much weight I'd gained. By this time, I was 250, 255, and I'm only 6 foot tall now.
Yeah.
So, I look at my wife and say, all this weight I've gained, I don't like it at all. She said, well, I've heard about this Atkins diet. Why don't you look into that?
Hmm.
And so I glanced at it. Oh, I just got to give up starches and bread, and I can eat all the fruit and meat I want. Okay, I can do that. And so I started the Atkins diet very imperfectly. And I lost like 35 pounds, and my mood got better.
Oh wow.
But at no time did my wife and I or my doctor make any connection to the food, to the eating.
Yeah, of
as
course
being
not.
a cause of that. Because, food doesn't call it. Your brain surely isn't part of your body.
Yeah.
And I got to go to 2009. I got to go to my 30-year high school reunion. I had a really good time. I'm a musician. While I was in the throes of the breakdown, I didn't touch an instrument for over a year, because it was just, for me, playing music's a very emotional thing. And there was no way what I was feeling that was a good idea. Mm-hmm. But in 2009, I did start picking the guitar up and started writing songs, wrote a couple of faith-based albums, got to perform in a couple of churches and speak. And, I thought life was going pretty good. And into early 2010, I thought, well, I'm doing a lot better. I knew I still wasn't right, but I was better. I was functioning at a much higher level. And then I thought, I miss having ice cream and coconut cake.
Yeah.
And if I get fat again, well, I'll just go back on Atkins. Mm-hmm. Not a brilliant move. Fast forward to July, middle of July, I'm at Mass on a Sunday evening. I'm a thankful Catholic convert, and it's right before consecration. We're on our knees, and everything's quiet. And I have this overwhelming, crazy red alert feeling pop up into my head that made my blood run cold, saying, if you don't get out of here right now, something really bad is going to happen. Now, I love going to Mass. I take all that very seriously, but I did something extraordinarily atypical. I jumped up and ran out of that church. I was riding a motorcycle then, hopped on my bike, came home, and 15 minutes later, I'm on the couch bawling like a baby, and I thought,
oh, wow.
This started the worst of the worst. It's when the medicine merry-go-round really took off. They had me on they even put me on seizure medication to see if that would help. They just started throwing different med combos at me. Prozac was always a part of it, but they would add other antidepressants. They take stuff away. I got put on Ativan, which I took for 8.5 years because of my anxiety. And then it was trazodone was the medicine that finally put me to sleep. With trazodone's another antidepressant that's also used off-label for insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that for eight years to sleep and woke up with a drug hangover for 8 years every morning because of it. Gained tons of weight. My wife's job moved because I was unable to work at all. I was a performing musician, and my behavior and such was not conducive to a band environment. And people started saying, well, why don't you just stay home tonight? Because you're just too hard to get along with. And in my head, I was like, but we sounded so good. I don't understand what the problem is. Anyway, my wife's job moved, and we had to come to Jacksonville, Florida, where we knew no one. And I had to find a new doctor, which was tons of fun in a town where you don't know anything. And I finally found a nurse practitioner who seemed to get what was going on, and she put me on Seroquel. And for a time, Rosa, I thought, ooh, I think we finally struck pay dirt, because for about 6 months, I was fairly stable. I was still very sick, but I was more functional and it was more consistent. I wrote a really good album, did a really poor job recording it, mastering it though, because I couldn't learn how to do things that I needed to learn how to do. I just couldn't I look at it, I could read about it, but I just couldn't. There was always something stopping me from making the connection intellectually the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I'd written these songs with credible performances, and the mixes are just horrendous. But my illness said, oh, that sounds great. Go ahead and release it. And you can still hear that album today on iTunes and Spotify and Amazon.
Yeah.
My performance moniker for that with Stickman Bleeding, and the name of the album is called Heroes, and people could still hear that today. They actually still listen to some of it. But I mean, my life was just a mess. It was just pill after pill, not being able to communicate. Things at home were getting more and more difficult because I was getting more and more frustrated. Fast forward to January of 2015, I weighed 289 pounds.
Wow.
I'm on 7 different medications. My psychiatrist, the last one I'll ever have, not named Georgia E., says I need to seriously consider electroshock therapy and or a long-term hospitalization.
Oh my gosh.
Now, thousands of years ago, when I had hair and a much better waistline, I worked in the psych field.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw patients 15 and 20 minutes after they had ECT. And I wasn't going to do that for any amount of money. Anything short of an angelic vision ordering me to, that was never going to happen. And my concern with the long-term hospitalization was I might go in and I might never get to come out.
Yeah. So
at this time, I'm still writing and recording music somehow. And I've got this project. I'd written some blues tunes that I couldn't sing. And I'd put a Craigslist ad in and found this incredibly talented lady who I still work with today. And her name bears mentioning because without her, you and I aren't having this conversation.
Yeah.
Her name's Kimmy Wade, and she's watching me falling apart and seeing how awful things are. And she says, well, have you ever thought about or looked into medical marijuana? Now, as a musician, it was always around, but I had a bad experience with it when I was young. And so I just, it wasn't my thing. Beer was legal. What do I need this for?
Yeah.
So I was the guy at rehearsals or at breaks during the gig that was always just passing it when it came by. It just wasn't my thing. But I did some research and saw some anecdotal evidence that some people were getting some symptom relief. And my wife and I talked about it, and we were like, what do we have to lose? I followed every direction, every medication I was ever prescribed, I took as directed. I never missed an appointment. I didn't want to be crazy anymore, but all that was happening from those efforts, I just got worse.
Mm-hmm.
So we secured 4 grams of flour. My wife found a can of butter recipe online, and she made these little quarter-size oatmeal cookies.
Oh.
Had raisins in them too. I guess you could call them keto cookies. They definitely weren't carnivore.
Oh, yeah.
And I was scared to death of these things. The first one I had, I broke in half because I'm still remembering my bad experience from 20 years earlier. And I ate that. And after about 10 minutes, it felt like 1,000 suns had lifted off of me.
Wow.
I wasn't high. It's just I didn't feel like crap anymore.
Wow.
And then about 40 minutes later, the high kicked in, and I learned that cannabis treated my symptoms hundreds of times better than any medication I ever took. Mm-hmm. The anxiety dropped almost to zero. My mood came up to something almost resembling normal. I was able to sleep a lot easier. I even might grin and giggle once in a while. Wow. And my wife came home that first evening. She didn't know she was like, who is this guy? Who are you? Mm-hmm. And then about 10 days after that, immediately after, half a cookie every day. But after about 10 days of that, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, putting my shoes on, and my belly's in the way.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's not good. It's not good at all. And I went and I looked at myself in the mirror and saw myself accurately for the first time in many years. And it was horrifying. My skin looked like something from The Walking Dead. I looked like somebody on the verge of a stroke or a heart attack, maybe both. And my hip was hurting really bad. I had a shoulder I couldn't sleep on at night because it hurt so bad. I had restricted range of motion. I was extremely obese and my body was starting to fall apart. And I recognized the seriousness of it immediately. And I told my wife, back on Atkins tonight. Now, see, you have to keep in mind, I'm a musician. I'm not a nutrition expert. Mm-hmm. Our understanding of Atkins was very, very poor. And we did silly things like my wife fixed these piles of ground beef with mozzarella cheese on it, but she would always drain the fat because, hey, we thought fat was bad for us.
Yep.
But with cannabis and that low carb, and I started walking the dog. Half a block here, a half a block there, a couple of blocks. Okay, there's 4 blocks. How far am I walking? I got one of those programs and put on my phone, and I found out how far away from the front door half a mile was. So I just do it down and back. Well, there's a mile. And as my weight started to decrease and my endurance started to increase, I found out how far away 1 mile was. So I could start doing 2-mile walks. And with cannabis, low carb, and walking for exercise, I walked off 94 pounds in 3 years.
Wow.
By the end of 2015, I was off the psych med, not the psych meds, the antidepressants and antipsychotics. By the end of 2016, I was off the Ativan. And by the end of 2017, I was off the trazodone. And with the exception of 1 round of antibiotics that I had in the fall of 2018 for an upper respiratory thing, I've not had any pharmaceutical meds at all, period.
Wow.
I was a lot better. I was more socially acceptable, but I still wasn't ready for prime time, as they say. Yeah. My behavior was still very inconsistent and unpredictable, even to myself. But the same friend of mine in May of 2018 that talked to me about cannabis messages me one day out of the blue and says, oh my gosh, you've got to go watch every video made by this guy named Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
And I immediately found the Dr. Peterson Destroys collection of videos and became an instant fan. And I believe him to be a man of great integrity, who promotes honesty and personal responsibility. And I think it's a good thing that he does that. And so that became part of my 420 regimen, you know, have a cookie and go watch Jordan Peterson videos. And then one day I came across this half-hour cutout of him on Joe Rogan where he's describing how his daughter figured out if she only ate beef, salt, and water, that her arthritis and her depression would go into remission. Mm-hmm. And then he explained how he started eating that way for a very similar reason, because he suffered from horrible anxiety and depression, which blew my mind, because here this man is functioning on this incredibly high intellectual level while he's mentally ill, and I'm doing my best just to eke out a coherent sentence. And if it's anybody but Jordan Peterson telling me this, Rosa, somebody with incredible integrity, in my opinion, I'm switching off. And this is crazy. They're eating nothing but meat. Are you serious? Everybody knows that's not going to work.
Yeah. Not good. It's not good for you, right?
Yeah, it's right. You're going to get scurvy and die. And then my wife comes home and I'm like, watch this. Is he really saying what I think he's saying? Oh yeah, he's really saying it. And so because it was this particular man, I kept searching, and I immediately found Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan.
Oh yeah. And
again, you Air Force combat surgeon. They just don't let anybody do that. You've got to be an extraordinarily well put together human to be considered for it. And I must have listened to the dietary portion of that discussion 50 times, because then I start thinking, this is just too good to be true. How come no doctor, all those doctors I saw before never mentioned this? Why? How is this possible? But I couldn't find any holes in these logic. And then I next stumbled on a Keto Fest talk that Amber O'Hearn gave in 2017, where she described in ways that this guitar player could understand how we as a species literally came down out of the trees because we were eating meat.
Yeah.
And how we grew these energy demanding brains in our current skeleton system. We evolved that way by eating meat.
Yep.
And there was enough pieces of the puzzle there for me to go, I have to try this. I have to. So July 16th, 2018 was day number 1, 0 carb.
Wow.
And I have only consumed animal fat and protein since then. 104 straight days as of today. No cheat days, no days off. And I will eat this way for the rest of my days. On the 10th day, Rosa, I woke up without joint pain for the first time as an adult.
Oh my gosh.
I had never been diagnosed with arthritis. I had what I called just aches and pains.
Yep.
The price for living 57 years, you know, and when I was gigging in clubs, I played lead guitar, and I'd be the guy that would jump up on tables for solos and run around the dance floor, and you might hit some spilt beer in the floor and their feet would be pointing straight to the ceiling, but you protected your instrument and you took the hit and you kept on playing.
Yeah.
You know, and then sometimes the table might give way on you. Again, you're protecting the instrument and your body pays the price. And if you walk around with like a question mark for a couple of days, hey, that's rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know?
Hardcore.
So I hurt in places, but I was ambulatory. I never thought of myself as, unable to do what I needed to do. But then you wake up without joint pain.
Yeah.
I'm skipping down the sidewalk during my early morning walk like a 9-year-old because it feels good. It doesn't hurt. And then on the 24th day, I'm taking my early morning walk. I get emotional about this still because it's such a beautiful thing. And you know, one of my big concerns when I started, I need to make sure I'm really feeling better. I can't talk myself into something that's not real because I was excited, you know, this is going to do it. These people I trust told me this is going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm taking this walk and it's like a switch flip. And all that rage and all that anger, all that sad, weepy darkness, all that shit that had kept me from doing any of the things I wanted to do with my life, that kept me from being the person I always wanted to be, it all just went away. And it was replaced by a waterfall of joy and happiness that hasn't left me for a moment since. And that's why I do these interviews, not because going down memory lane's a good time, but because people need to know.
Yeah.
You're not broken. Your mom and dad didn't make a mistake. You're not a genetic error. You were taught, like I was, to eat things under the false premise that they were healthy.
Yeah.
And your brain's inflamed just like mine was. Past tense. It's not inflamed anymore, thank God.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. You know, I've spent in the time since learning how to be a regular person. You know, my symptoms went away, but there wasn't a toolbox with my name on it saying Brett's Happy Skills. You know, good luck.
Yeah.
I had to literally learn how to be a semi-normal human being. And I still am in many ways.
Well, I think you're an extraordinary human being, actually.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that immensely. But that's it in a nutshell. I'm very fortunate. I'm extremely thankful, and my sanity is my most prized possession.
Yeah, it should be.
And you're absolutely right. And a lot of people take theirs for granted, or they're not even aware. They've been brain fogged for so long, they're oblivious to the fact that there might be a problem.
Yeah.
But that's why I do this. And I thank you very much for this chance to share that with you.
Yeah, I thank you so much for coming on. I did have a few questions for you.
Sure, ask away.
So I just want to know, you know, what was the reaction? You know, your family, your friends, what did they think of this whole new Brett? How did they react?
My wife's a big fan. You know?
Yeah.
She was there watching all of this happen. And then after I didn't die after the first month, then she started. And she's a month behind me in carnivore. She had osteoarthritis in her shoulder. And now, you know, that went away after a couple of months for her. And what it's done for our marriage has just been insane, because when you're not inflamed, your hormones come into balance.
Oh, yeah.
And she's 62, I'm 60, but we feel like we're 25.
Wow.
And our level of communication is insanely off the charts. Our level of intimacy is almost like something out of a fairy tale. It's so amazing. So she's good with it. Believe me.
Yes, I bet. I bet she is.
Now, the rest of my family, however, my mom just recently began to understand, yes, you really are changed. My mom still lives in West Virginia, and I got to go spend a weekend with her last month. And it was fun. We sat there in the living room and talked. The TV never even got turned on once the whole time I was there.
Wow.
And she got to finally experience her son as a sane adult for the very first time. So it took that long weekend, 2.5 years after I lost my symptoms, before she could accept it, because my dad had been so sick and he had dementia. And so she was laser focused on taking care of him.
Of course.
And as long as I wasn't laying in the road bleeding or something, she really wasn't paying much attention, which is understandable. I've got family members, my sister still suffers from ulcerative colitis. She manages it. I'm like, you could eliminate that altogether, but she's not interested. I did my research kind of thing. Well, okay. My son from my first marriage, he's unfortunately very much like I was, only his illness manifests itself a bit differently. He's not jumped on board in any way, shape, or form, and he's paying the price for it, unfortunately. But he's a grown man. It's not like I can ground him,
Yeah.
But most of my friends that I grew up with, while they were happy to see the weight loss, they were very disturbed when I started, hey, I'm just going to meat and water. Oh, don't you know how dangerous that is? That's so extreme. That's really, you've done some crazy things before, but this is really, really dangerous. And even after I lost my symptoms and, oh no, this is still so extreme. So, what's really happened is a lot of old friends are no longer current friends. And I've found in the carnivore community, people who aren't brain fogged are so much easier to talk to.
Yes. Yes.
And they're so open, and you can disagree about things and nobody loses their mind. Nobody gets triggered. Nobody gets offended over the least little thing. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm so blessed.
Yeah, I've noticed that with the carnivore and even keto space, is that we don't get shut out of the club. We get welcomed. We get welcomed in.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's all about the reduced inflammation.
Yeah.
It's not that anybody gets any smarter. It's just you start operating like the person you were always supposed to be.
Yes.
And life still throws challenges at you. The car won't start some mornings, or maybe you have a flat tire. Maybe there's a problem with the home and you don't know how you're going to pay for it. And this here thing just will not stay in place.
Yeah.
Here we go. But carnivore makes managing that so much easier, because we talk about it in the community as carnivore zen.
Yeah.
You're a responsive person versus being reactive, and you don't waste time on nothing burgers.
Yes.
Things you used to pour a ton of energy into and worry and be anxious about, rant and rave, and then you realize, well, that was nothing. What was I losing my mind over that for? It's a calmer, happier way of living. I experience effortless daily happiness every day. Every day. It's like my father, I helped take care of him my mom take care of him the last 3 weeks of his life in home hospice. And that was sad.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare to watch. I wish I could have filmed some of it.
Yeah.
To show people, type 2 diabetes, this is your end game.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, because it was a horror show.
I know my father actually had that.
And
it does not run in our family. So, I know that it's not genetics, it's our environment and what we're eating. And
exactly.
I worry about him daily. So
It's definitely reversible.
yeah, it is.
But I was unable, by the time I learned what I learned, his dementia was already too far, had progressed too far.
Yeah.
And, there was just not going to be any way to make a difference. And also his kidneys were already, so they were past the point of no return, basically. So that was unfortunate. He never got to see me as the same person. But even when through all that sadness, I didn't have a down day. I mean, I was there to do a job. I was there to help take care of my dad and make sure he didn't hurt himself or anybody else. And when there needed to be heavy lifting done, because I'd been participating in resistance training up to that point, I was obviously the logical one to move him around. And even the morning that he passed away, I'm sitting on an airplane like 3 or 4 hours after that, and I'm like, well, he's not suffering anymore. That's a good thing. As a family, we're not suffering anymore watching him suffer. And that's a very good thing as well. And while it was a sad day, it was still a good day.
Yeah.
And, I went from the glass being half empty with a crack in it and a big leak to, the glass is always half full. And seeing positives everywhere I look now is much more common than seeing negatives. And what negatives I do see are either nothing burgers or little things, adjustments that I need to make in myself.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes. Oh, wow. That's very inspirational, Brett. And I thank you so much for coming on here. I will let, I've had you for long enough, so I will let you go. I just have one last question.
Sure.
So how are you rocking your best life today?
Today, I rock my best life by, number one, staying on task with my eating. I'm writing music again and recording 2 projects. I'm fired up beyond words about that. It's so nice to work on music and create things that are much more positive and hopeful sounding rather than the dirgy, woe is me nonsense I was writing previously when I was sick. And coaching, and I also at MeatRx, through MeatRx, and I facilitate 2 mental health meetings there at MeatRx as well. That's so rewarding. And being the best advocate I can be for this way of eating, because it is a vocation. Yeah. For me now. And that's how I'm rocking my life.
And you are
living
rocking it.
living the example, being the example. People are like, well, why do you post just the same pictures of doing the same things all the time? It's because consistency breeds success.
Yeah, it does.
And people need to see what the journey looks like. Yeah. In order to follow it. And when you start getting messages from people, I heard you on this podcast, or I heard you on that podcast, and I've been sick for 25 years, and I took a chance because what you said spoke to me, and now I'm happy and I'm symptom free. And you get those kinds of messages, it's better than winning the lottery. I think it's just a priceless gift that I can never give away.
So where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram at thankful.carnivore. If you got questions about the carnivore way of eating, don't hesitate to DM me. I answer them all. I'm also on Twitter at stickmanbleeding. That's STICKMANBLEEDIN. Don't add a G. If you add a G, you won't find me. And I answer all DMs there as well. And got any questions, you want to figure out how to do this successfully, don't hesitate to reach out, because I'm happy to help and answer all the questions I can. Okay, well, Brett, you have been amazing. I will let you go, and have a blessed rest of your evening. Thank you so much, Rosa, and congratulations on your podcast. And I hope it's a success and that more people than ever before learn that they don't have to suffer anymore. They can eat meat, drink water, and heal.
Yes, they can. Okay, Brett, thank you so much. I will see you later.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Okay, bye.